We have a couple different types of grips, which you can take a look at on your own. We're going to talk about isolation exercises, and this is when you work a muscle individually. So a tricep extension, a bicep curl. All right, so it's one joint moving, and it's typically one muscle that is working. And in this case, you're going to use much lighter weight than you typically would use for your multi-joint lifts. So you have less joint action, less muscle action, burning less calories. What would be the benefit, though, of isolation exercises? And there are benefits. It shouldn't comprise your whole entire workout. A lot of times when I go to the gym, I see people and they're doing so many single joint lifts and they never grow. The reason why that is because they can't load the weight on the bar or utilize a machine that's a multi-joint lift with more weight. The more weight you're able to use in a safe manner, the better results you're going to get. Isolation exercises are great, though, for rehab. So if you have an injury to a muscle or a joint, it's great for that. It's also good for adding volume to your workout. It's also good for training weak points. So for example, if I were to bench press and I have the bar hit my chest and I can't push the bar off of my chest for my maximal lift, but once I get to about a quarter of the way through the movement with assistance, I can lock out easily. That tells me my tricep is very strong, but my chest is weak, so I can work my chest in order to train that weak point of my body. So those are the main reasons you want to perform isolation exercises. It also can aid in what's called muscle hypertrophy, or getting bigger. So if you want your triceps bigger, you can do extra isolation work for your triceps or your chest or your back. Any of these muscle groups you can do isolation exercises for. I wouldn't kill your workout with isolation exercises. Focus on your multi-joint, but isolation exercises are still good. Progressive overload. This is just the idea that you need to increase what you're doing over time or your body will cease to change. You can do that in a lot of ways. You can increase the resistance and decrease the reps. You can lower resistance and increase the reps. You can have shorter rest times. You can change the order in which you do exercises. You can increase the overall volume of the workout program or change the tempo. The volume is just the amount of work that you're doing. We're going to talk about some different types of muscle contraction as well. So we have eccentric, that's the elongation of muscle while you are fighting against resistance. So the easiest way to think about this, I would imagine, is a bench press. So I say I have the bar right off the rack. When I lower the bar to my chest is elongating, but it's still contracting to move the weight carefully. So it's elongating but contracting. Then we have the concentric. That's when the muscle shortens and contracts. So that would be when I push the bar off my chest and back to the starting position. An isometric exercise, that's when you're generating force without a change in length. A plank would be an example of an isometric exercise. A wall sit would also be an example of an isometric exercise. When we talk about tempo, it's just the rate at which you move the bar. You always, especially when you're first beginning, you always want to control the weight. So you want to lower the weight slowly. When you go through the contraction portion, you can go a little bit faster, but you don't want to go real fast. Typically, the tempo would be 2, 1, 1. So if we go to the full screen, all right, so if I have the bar out, all right, so I'm at the starting position. I'm going to lower it for 2, 1, 2, rest on my chest 1, explode up for 1, hold it at the top for 1. All right, so that is the tempo. So again, the eccentric portion, the lowering, that's going to be the portion that you want to move the bar a little bit slower. The concentric, you can explode up a little bit quicker. If you ever watched an NFL player do the 225 bench press, they don't have a tempo. They go as fast as they can, bouncing the bar oftentimes off of their chest. These are trained athletes that have trained for years specifically to lift 225 at that rate, at that pace. Please do not do that when you go to the gym. That is not how someone who is just getting into working out or is not a professionally trained athlete should be lifting. So these individuals can do that because they've trained for that. You're going to be at risk for getting hurt if you do that. Control the weight, control the tempo. The tempo at which you move weight is much more important than the actual weight that you use at times. If you have to alter your movement, you're not in a good spot. Do not alter your movement in order to increase the weight. What is your core? Your core are your abdominal muscles, right? They are, but it's also all of the muscles that attach at the spine. So your hamstrings, your hip flexors, your glute muscles. This is called the lumbopelvic hip complex. All right, these are all the muscles that cross that area of your hips and lower back. Creating intra-abdominal pressure is important, making sure you have good posture, drawing in your abdominals, and contracting your core before you lift any type of weight or use any type of machine is the most important. Your posture is key. All right, talking about engaging your core, you can check out some of the core muscles here, some stability. Using something that's less stable, so changing the movement to make it less stable is something that can benefit you when it comes to training the muscles of the core. So you can see a crunch on the floor. So I'm laying on the floor is not moving. All right, so the floor is very stable. I don't have to balance myself. I'm just going to do a crunch. All right, versus on an exercise ball. So we're on a plyo ball, one of those big round balls that you've seen in the weight room at the gym. Maybe you've seen it at, a gym that you've gone to outside of school, but we also have them in the weight room at our school. And they create what's called instability. This instability forces the body to balance itself. It makes the muscles of the core contract. All right, it's very important to know the difference between the two. As you decrease stability, you have to decrease the resistance as well. It does have its benefits. You always want to perform what's called a risk versus reward analysis. So is that exercise going to hurt me? If the answer is yes, you have to think to yourself, well, what type of benefit would I get from it? And then probably not much. We're not going to do that exercise. All right, so some examples might be standing on an exercise ball while trying to squat. All right, that's something that you probably should never, ever do. Individuals that would benefit, from stability training would be people with back issues, athletes that are trying to increase their balance. You don't necessarily have to train for balance in stability, but as you get older, you probably will wind up doing so. The path of least resistance. This is basically the theory that the body moves through the easiest path. So if you increase the weight too heavy, your body is going to shift the form and contort itself in order to help move that weight a little bit easier. If you feel your body doing that, it's important to lower the weight. You never want to change your form to move more weight. You always want to be in control of the weights. Don't let the weights control you. The kinetic chain, there's a whole lot of text here. It gives you an example down below. The kinetic chain just states that everything underneath affects everything on top. So if you have an alteration in your movement at your ankle, it changes the angle of the knee, the hip, the back, the neck, the shoulder, all of those things above it. Everything affects everything on top of it. That's the idea of the kinetic chain. If you have a movement that is messed up at some point, it's going to mess up angles in other joints above it, and it can facilitate injury in areas above that joint. So if you have a knee issue and you're a pitcher and it changes the way that you rotate through your pitch, you could actually strain your shoulder, or strain your elbow, or your neck, or your back. All of those things come into play. So everything below it affects everything above it. The nervous system. All right, the nervous system is where strength is initiated. You don't have to be the biggest person in the world in order to lift a lot of weight. You can train your nervous system. The way that you train your nervous system is through very heavy weight with very low reps and very long rest times. The nervous system takes a long time in order to recoup between heavy lifting sets. So if I were to do sets of 2, I might rest 3 to 5 minutes between my sets in order to train my nervous system to move as much weight as possible. There was a kid that I went to college with. He was probably about 160 and he bench pressed like 500 pounds. He was one of the best at his weight classes in the state of New Jersey. And the reason why he was able to lift so much was because he trained his nervous system to do so. You have motor engrams in your brain. This is where the saying perfect practice makes perfect, not practice makes perfect, because the more you repeat something, the movement patterns for that movement are going to be located in your brain. An example would be crossing your arms. So if I cross my arms, let's go with the full screen here. If I were to cross my arms and then try to cross my arms the other way, it feels awkward. All right, it's not something that is easily done. I can easily cross my arms, and the same thing goes with movement. So if I practice all of my lifts and movements the same correctly all the time, I'm always going to do them correctly because the movement pattern is stored in my brain. And that's extremely important, not only with things like that, as far as your lifts go, but also just moving throughout life. Not plopping into chairs, sitting back, engaging your glutes and sitting back into a chair. Having good posture while you're seated, standing up out of a chair. The more that you do things, we'll say inappropriately or in ways that aren't efficient movement patterns, it's going to alter your posture. It's going to cause different pains in different joints, especially as you get older and these improper movement patterns are facilitated. So being very cognizant of the way that you're moving, how you're sitting, how you're getting up out of a chair, having good posture, understanding that these are of prime importance in order to preserve your health. The better that you realize that and practice it, the better off you're going to be. So how often should I lift? You need at least 48 hours of rest in between working a muscle. So if I were to lift my chest on Monday, I shouldn't lift my chest again until Wednesday. There are lifters that are trained to do this. They lift 4 or 5 times a week with the same movements. But again, these are highly trained athletes, Olympic lifters. When they do increase the volume weekly, they have to also decrease the volume per workout. So they're not going to completely overload those particular muscles every single day throughout the week if they're lifting 4 or 5 times in that week. So you have to keep that in mind as well. But again, these are trained athletes that lift the same movement pattern over and over with decently high resistance. For most people, you're going to need about 48 hours of rest. You can work out if you split your muscle groups up. You can work out, 4 or 5 days a week, but you just got to make sure you have that 48 hours of rest in between each muscle group as they are worked. Frequency, intensity, time, and type is the FIT principle. You can take a look at that. There's some practice and some answers on here. We're going to talk about cardiovascular fitness. This is working over a long period of time. So your heart rate's increased, your breathing is increased, everything increases. Anaerobic versus aerobic. Aerobic is using oxygen. So these are your cardiovascular activities. Anaerobic are your exercises that are short duration. So it uses very little oxygen. Some examples would be sprint work and weightlifting. Does that mean that there's no oxygen usage and weightlifting is never aerobic? That is not true. There is crossover, but typically it's an anaerobic type of workout. So the fat burning zone myth. This is really important if you decide to work out at a gym. So you'll go onto a machine, you'll see a button that says fat burning, boom, you click the fat burning button and you think, man, I'm set. I'm out here burning all this fat, right? But we're going to take a look at a chart here and we're going to compare the lower intensity, which would be the fat burning zone, versus the high intensity. The high intensity is working MHR is your maximum heart rate. So we're going to be working at 80 to 85% of your maximum heart rate in the high intensity, and the low intensity or fat burning zone at 60 to 65%. So if you take a look at the bottom, the percentage of fat calories burned, we're going to have 50% burned for the lower intensity versus about 40% for the higher intensity. So you think, well, then I want to work in the lower intensity. But the percentage is a little bit misleading. That's where they get the idea to put fat burning zone on the machine, but you're actually going to burn less calories overall. So if you take a look up at the top, total calories expended per minute, 4.86 for the lower intensity and 6.86 for the higher intensity. Then if you take a look down the list for the rest of them, you can see that the higher intensity burns more calories overall. So you're probably thinking, well, where are they burning those calories from? Well, when we have an increase in intensity, if we think back to the nutrition unit, all of our quick duration, quick burst energy things are going to pull from your carbohydrate stores. So when you increase the intensity, you're going to burn not only from fat, but also your carbohydrates, which decreases the percentage of calories that are burned from fat, but overall increases the calories burned. So it's always best to increase your intensity to 80 to 85% of your maximum heart rate. So you might be thinking, well, who would work at the lower intensity levels? These would be people that want to preserve their carbohydrate stores. So somebody that is getting ready for some type of meet or something, maybe within the next day or two. Somebody that is a power lifter that doesn't want to deplete their carbohydrate stores, but they want the benefits of heart health and cardiovascular health. They may work in the lower intensity level, but most people are going to benefit from the higher intensity, 80 to 85% maximum heart rate. So we're going to talk about heart rate. And your resting heart rate, it's the amount of times a person's heart beats per minute when at rest. You can take your heart rate on your own if you would like. The best time to take your resting heart rate would be right when you wake up in the morning. And you would take it down the thumb side of your wrist. Hold on. Right here. All right, I can feel mine beating. So down the thumb side, I can feel it. Do not use your thumb. Your thumb actually has a pulse of its own. So if you were to press really hard with your thumb, you would actually feel the pulse in your thumb. So you don't want to use your thumb. Use 2 fingers. Count for 15 seconds and multiply it by 4. Why 4? Because 15 times 4 gets us 60, which would be 1 minute. All right, so that's why we're going to do that. So again, you take your pulse for 15 seconds. At the end of 15 seconds, take that number, multiply it by 4, and you have your resting heart rate. And when is it best to take that? Again, right when you first wake up. Your maximum heart rate is estimated by 220 minus your age. So to find your maximum heart rate, you would take 220 and subtract 17 or 18 or 19, however old you are. For me, it would be 220 minus 37, all right? And that would be my maximum heart rate estimated. Your heart rate reserve is your maximum heart rate minus your resting heart rate. You don't have to worry about heart rate reserve. We're going to talk about what's called the training zone. And the training zone is the rate at which you want your heart to be working. And these numbers come from what's called the Karvonen formula. You're not going to have to memorize this formula, but I just want you to know what it is. Currently now, you can look up training zone calculator or Karvonen formula calculator, and you can put all your information into the app or into the website, and it'll do all of this for you. It's up on the screen. All right, this will basically calculate the range at which your heart rate should be beating during cardiovascular activity. You can see down the bottom, we do get an upper end or high end of the training zone. For this person, it would be 168. The lower end would be 128. So this person wants to work somewhere in that range. It's a 50 to 85% range. If you want to work on the lower end, that would be more of the quote unquote fat burning zone, not depleting your carbohydrate stores. If you want to burn calories, you want to work more toward that 168. It's all dependent on what you want. We also have some practice questions with the answers. If you want to, if you're just super keen into math and you want to try to answer those questions on your own, you can. And that's the end of the PowerPoint. So got through this rather quickly. If you have any questions, be sure to send me an email. Also up top, you can see that the teacher's emails are up top. There are going to be assignments associated with this. There will be a test on this. It's going to be focused mostly on the beginning portion with the movement patterns and the muscles and all that kind of stuff. If you have any questions, again, make sure you email me. Also, if you want to email any of your other teachers, the emails are up there. The Google Classrooms, make sure you check it. So hopefully you guys are safe, doing well, and I'll talk to you again real soon.